Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know it's rainy and gloomy outside, but there's so much warmth and love in this space, and so we are so grateful for your presence with us today. My name is Reverend Alicia Gordon, and I am one of the pastors here at the Riverside Church, and I am here to bring welcome. This feels very like Southern Missionary Baptist Church where I grew up, where, you know, people do the welcome and stuff. So I want to welcome you to this sacred space where we will lift up the stories and voices of the unseen and the unheard. This is a space where the stories of countless women whose identities have been shaped not only by their cultural contexts across the diaspora, but their experiences as domestic workers here in the United States. The Riverside Church is uniquely positioned both socially and geographically in the surrounding communities where there are stark differences around class, race, and social location. In today's exhibit, the Nanny Series, a Postcolonial Reading, I believe is calling us to see the unseen, to hear the stories of the silence, and leaves us with the charge to change our embedded theologies and ideologies around domestic workers' rights and experiences right here in our own community. Our attempts to not only have these conversations, but live into the gospel truth that all people deserve a right to be seen and heard, amen? To be loved and cared for, to experience the liberating power of God's goodness is the hope of our time today. It is also for us to hold a mirror up to ourselves so we may reflect on the ways we uphold the systems that make equitable opportunities difficult for women across the globe. This space is a space for Black and brown women to share their stories, to bring their stories from the margins to the center. And we hope that these conversations will help us see the invisible, hear the unheard, and better understand the complexities and nuances of the lives of domestic workers. And we welcome you, welcome your voices, your stories, your thoughts and experiences as we sojourn together. So I have the pleasure of introducing the panelists for today. Please help me in welcoming our panelists, including painter Laura James, Dr. Sonia James-Wilson, founder and president of ArtID International. Christine Lewis, secretary and cultural outreach coordinator for the Domestic Workers United. And our lovely moderator, cultural advocate Sharon Gordon. A question and answer period will follow this panel after the discussion. So now I'd like to bring Ms. Shannon Gordon to tell us more about today's exhibit. Thank you.
Greetings, as we say in Jamaica. Wampum, how you do? Good afternoon. Yes. As we're representing women from that region in this artwork and in this conversation, I felt it was necessary to bring the vibe of the women who come from that place. And some say, Wampum, how you do? Morning, good afternoon. It's a greeting of salutation, and we're happy to see you here. Now, what is this all about? Well, allow me to share with you an abstract about this exhibition. Everybody good? Just want to get a pulse. Everybody's good? All righty. Now it's time for us to get into it, right? So the Nanny Series is a post-colonial reading, a visual artist, Laura James, and her sister and collaborator, independent scholar, Dr. Sonia James-Wilson, where they address issues of identity, work, and motherhood through Laura's surrealist images of Caribbean women who work as nannies, and their interpretations of the work as captured in various focus groups conducted by Dr. James-Wilson, and this is what we're seeing here. Now, these focus groups, the participants included women from former colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and South Asia, and all of these women were members of Domestic Workers United, an organization that advocates for the industry work standards, They talk about including better wages, improved working conditions, and respect of employers. In the conversations that they have had, the Nanny Series paintings were used as an entry point from which these women told their stories and recognized the commonalities across their unique experience of coming to these United States to seek work, an opportunity unavailable in their home countries. As an aside, I'd just like, as you go around, to read the small excerpts as you see them next to each painting, to hear the voices of some of these women. As a conceptual lens through which to understand this work, postcolonial theories provide rich and nuanced perspectives for examining the ways in which identity is constructed and deconstructed for female domestic workers, and how their common experiences of exploitation and marginalization have fueled their grassroots social movement. This was first presented in 2012 at the International Sociological Association World Congress in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The Nanny Series, a postcolonial reading, uses visual arts as a way to talk about the primary goal of the colonial project, which was to accumulate wealth for Western nations through the economic exploitation of others. Simply put, that's what it is. As MacLeod suggests, postcolonialism is not the same as after colonialism. Instead, post-colonialism recognizes both the historical continuity of ideas and practices that are still very much in place today, while acknowledging that important social, cultural, and political changes achieved over time as a result of organizing and resistance. Christine Lewis, Secretary and Cultural Outreach Coordinator for Domestic Workers United, will speak to you in her words about her experience as a domestic worker and the meaning she finds in Laura James's paintings. She will also provide an update on the current state of the organization and conditions for domestic women working in New York City. Our artist, Laura James, will discuss how her interest in domestic workers stems from experiences from her childhood. And Dr. James-Wilson will discuss the themes that emerged in conversations with domestic workers 7 years ago and how gender, economics, and colonial mindsets still limits opportunities for young people living in the global South today. So therein, you have it. That is the abstract about this presentation today. But I'd like to take this time before I introduce Christine Lewis, who will be presenting us with a poem, an autobiographical piece she did in 2002. I'd like to share with you that I stand here as so many, as a child of a domestic worker, someone who did not leave Jamaica because she wanted to, but she had to, in order to make a better life for her children. So we had a mother who, I grew up seeing my mother as an entrepreneur who had her own business. Many of us can relate to that. We grew up as upper class citizens. We didn't know that at the time because our mother never made you know that. We still had to do all our work. However, she gave all of that up at a time of political strife in Jamaica to come to America, where she thought she could then work, make some money, send for us so that we could come here and go to school and have a better life. It's a story of so many, so many. And so for me, this is personal, because I stand here like these sisters here as a child who has come here and done good and done well. And so we thank God for that opportunity, and we say amen and amen and amen. And so as I open the floor today, I'd like to invite Christine to come and share with us, and please give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
Hold on, Christine. Darling, yes.
You all went to church, had a good time, give praises, and out to enjoy this beautiful art exhibit, right? Yes. So I'll delve into a poem. I'm Christine Lewis, and I am the Secretary Outreach Coordinator, Cultural Outreach Coordinator with Domestic Workers United. Let me just say why I came to do the work of leadership activism. Understanding the history of the United States and who made America boss, who picked cotton day in and day out, and who was excluded from labor laws, National Labor Relations Act, and the Fair Labor Standards. We understand it was black folks, black women who work in the homes, and black men who worked on the plantation, who picked the cotton along with the women. And we understand along the way, due to neoliberal policies that push folks out from their countries to come and make a better life, whatever that means, a better life for their family, which brings people abroad. For years, people have been going to London, and people have been coming to the United States, as my sister friends say here, to make a better life, to give to our children, who we call the barrel children. Those are the children we send these good stuff home to, and you know, because we leave them here for the grandmothers, as we see in the pictures there, to take care of. And they tell a lot of stories. So I'll delve into this poem that I had written because it was an experience that I experienced working for somebody. And by the way, I really didn't leave Trinidad to come to work in somebody's home, but all work is sacred. Yes? We start somewhere, and it has helped most of us. So we must explore the fact that all work is sacred and be the best that you could be at it. And one of the beautiful things is that we raised our children and we raise somebody else's children, and we see the beauty and the joy in raising this other person's children, all to the demise of our own family, but doing it with integrity and dignity. However, integrity and dignity still didn't pay the bill. That's why we have to fight, yeah? Fighting religiously, fighting when we don't even want to fight. Getting tired, sick and tired of fighting, but fighting, going the full distance. And so this is you know, I was sitting in somebody's home and there was something that popped out at me, you know? And I was moved. And I'm moved right now because I'm moved at this painting, I'm moved at sitting with these dynamic women in the room. And I'm normally not moved, I just come and do what I have to do, but I'm moved. And thanks for your presence, thanks for your spirit, thanks for your grace, thanks for the painting, thanks for curating. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, my sister. Thank you, pastor. Housekeepers, house sitters, au pairs, nannies, babysitters, caregivers, bottle scrubbers, window washers, homemakers, day laborers, engineer, plumbers, homemakers, window washers, dog walkers, companion, custodial engineers, caregivers, soldiers, warriors, madres y padres, mama y papas, sister friend, super sister friend, supermodel look modern day mammies. And she's in all these paintings. That woman with the maypole string, she's all that she could be. She's all the woman that I just called and more, because she's a woman of color, and black woman has been everything to everybody except themselves. And we still are. We never say no. But we're the maypole woman with all these strings and balloons attached and doing all that we could do. She's a dynamic woman. She's a woman like immortal tree, ageless, stoic, diva, invisible woman, decision maker, pre-K teacher. She's a superwoman that she's not. Mary Poppins was fictitious. Juggles 12 bottles standing like decorated soldiers along pearl pink enamel sink, bellies coated with remnants of weekend rancid milk, diapers, A&D, Dr. Leish's how-to, finger paints, pancakes, Skittles, scones, dustpan, swifter. Did someone say lighthouse keeping? Ever such a thing? Tantrums, timeout, chronic fatigue, mood swing syndrome, stylish McLaren navigates, serious sidewalk, eerie eyes grow out of grate. The probe passerby asks, he probes my existence here. He asks, is that all you can do? Tied to remember in long lines, longer than ladder Jacob saw at Food Emporium. Interviews 4 times this week. How many ways to clean poop? Count the ways. Mammograms delayed, thank Thursday, underscored in Crayola red. Apple picking along the Hudson. PTA put off to serve filet mignon, diced carrots, blue cheese, cream cheese, all kind of cheese in flamboyant room. Clear crystal chandeliers hang. Extra $1, seals, sliver of rustin galvanized, where star apple sun anoints, placid palm blades in colorful calypso air. Ballet, it never stops. Museum miles, maybe the Hamptons. Movies, play dates, play space and fate. Bedtime, little engine that could, 5 times tonight. And this is serious here. 1955, Mother Goose Nursery, Jim Crow. Wasn't a goldfinch who could crow. Destiny of 10 little and boys, uncertain. Their mama's burdened breast, once erect, fall like young pawpaw, or it falls like a honeydew. Genuflex earthward, as if pleading before God to have mercy. Emptied of its morsel by folks and innocents on plantation at Easy Street, whose fangs of affluence clutch, sucks without pity, and rejects. Maggots bore hole in consciences, reward with mere pittance, pocket change for 4th grader at York. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Christine, for that. I was here for your worship this morning, your service, and I'd like to quote, I think it was Reverend Amanda, and she spoke about the widow. And she said, make things right for me. Someone is treating me badly. And that's the cry of the nannies, the domestic workers. It's the cry that you feel when you look at these paintings that Laura has brought to us. And in full disclosure, Laura and I have been friends for more than a quarter century. And I know, Laura, I gasped myself, closer to 30 years than even 25. And I've watched Laura labor over her work. And I've watched her pour her existence, her life, into her work. It is absolutely a testament and a tribute when you look at the Nanny Series, to see and to recognize that this is a woman who understands that in her work, she is making it right. She's telling the story of so many whose stories need to be told. I ask you to please stand and welcome my friend, our artist. Huh? Yes, I want them to. You deserve that. We must praise and recognize our own. And I'm asking you, please, Laura is the most humble person you'll ever meet. To stand if you can, and recognize as I bring her to the microphone, Laura James. You want me to bring it to you? Okay. And she says, no, you can sit. Laura is very, very shy, just so you know that. But it's humility that makes her who she is. And I thank you all for that. Laura, here you go.
Good. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much. I'm going to try not to cry. Okay. So this story starts with my mother. Okay. Okay. Is this okay? Yes. Okay. So it starts with my mother and her relationship with our elementary school teachers, because we lived across the street from our elementary school in Brooklyn, New York, in Bed-Stuy, and we were well behaved, or my sisters were anyway, because I hadn't gone to school yet, but they were very well behaved, and the teachers really loved them, and they really liked my mother. And one teacher in particular, she was going to have a baby. I think this was like 75 or something like that, 1975. And she asked my mother if she would watch the baby because she needed to work. She also needed to work. So my mother said yes, because my mother's an enterprising woman, and she was basically a homemaker. You know, she did do domestic work. She had people that she would, you know, clean for them regularly, let's say, but she mostly stayed home. So these are some pictures of, the top two pictures are from the time when she first started watching. This picture over here, actually, I hope that I don't cry, because, you know, this is my family, so it's sort of touching. Actually, that's a picture of me down there in the bathing suit. Okay, so we became very good friends with these people over time. It wasn't like, you know, like a job or only a job, let's say, right? My mother was also, you know, they really respected her. And so they would come and pick up their kids, but then they would sort of stick around, you know, until my father came home and was like, where's dinner? You know, because they were talking and asking advice and all this. And I guess over the years, maybe she watched 5 children altogether. So the pictures on the bottom were from Woodstock. One of the women had a house there, and so we would go in the summertime sometimes. Sonia, how many years did Mommy watch these children? Like 6, 10 years? Like it was a long time. Yeah, a long time. These are just some pictures of my aunts and uncles up on top in Antigua, where my people are from Antigua. And that's a picture of my mother in her home in Antigua. My parents were here for, I don't know, maybe 20 years, and then they moved back to the country, which is what they had wanted to do. They came, they worked, they did what they had to do, and then they moved back. So this was when they first moved back. That's a picture of my mother on the bottom. And this is a picture of her from maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And she actually passed away about 2 years ago. Okay, so I didn't really realize that this whole thing affected me per se, because when she first started to watch the children, I hadn't gone to school yet. I was pre-K, so I was still at home. And, you know, so, you know, my mother, it's like me and my mother, my other sisters had gone to school, and then all of a sudden it's like me and my mother and a couple of kids, and then like more kids, and it was, you know, it was a little weird, but I liked them well enough, and, you know, I would play with them, obviously, you know, we were all kids together. But then there were some women who came to our house who came from St. Kitts, a woman from Barbados, you know, friends of friends and maybe a relative who came to work and to live out. So they lived on Long Island with the family during the week, and so they had to have a place to stay on the weekend, and they would come to our house. So there were about 3 women over time. And the thing that impressed me about them is that, you know, they come to our house, we're like, you know, for years, because they're getting their papers. I mean, 3 years, 5 years, it takes a very long time. And then, like, as soon as they got the papers, like, they were out of there. It's like, maybe they said, I mean, they must have said goodbye to my mother, but it was just like, well, where's Adela? Like, where did she go, you know? But, you know, I could tell that it was like they were here for a reason. There was something very serious going on, and it happened. You know, they got their papers, so bye, you know? Anyway. Okay, so I'll just show one more picture. This is a picture of some of the teachers that my mother took care of their kids, and a couple that she didn't take care of their kids, but, you know, we did this thing, open classroom. I don't know if they still have that, but it was just like it was like the 70s and 80s. It was very kumbaya and cool, and it was good, and we learned a lot, actually. It was a very good curriculum. We learned a lot, and we enjoyed it, you know. But anyway, this is maybe from maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But we still do get together, and we're all like communicating on Facebook all the time, so. Let's see what's next. So I've been making this work for, I don't know, I feel so old all the time. I don't know, maybe 20 years, over years. You know, I'll do a few paintings and I would sell them. But I've always wanted to show the work all together like this. And so I thought it might be good to make prints so that we could, you know, travel them around and, you know, get more people to see the work, which is really the idea. So these are pictures from the Bronx, no, I'm sorry, Borough Manhattan Community College. There was an exhibit there a few years ago where we presented these pieces, and it was well received. What's next? So this is from that exhibit where these are women from DWU who, some of them were participated in our focus group. So I would just talk about how I met Christine. I had an exhibit of some of these paintings at the College of New Rochelle, and Christine was there, and we got to talking. And the next thing you know, I was lobbying senators in Albany for a domestic workers' bill of rights, because Christine is very convincing. And you know, it's important. You know, they were agitating for a Bill of Rights because they didn't have any rights, you know, and they actually got it too, which is great. So, and I hopefully you can tell us a little bit about that. But after that, I got to talking with some of the women, and my sister came up with the idea of, sort of, I guess a focus group. We had them look at the art and talk about how it related to them. And the thing that really touched me is that, you know, they got it, you know? It's like, obviously, you know, but I felt good to know that, okay, I hit on something true, let's say, because it was just obvious to them. It's like it was this, you know, I told this story, yes, exactly, thank you. So that was, I was happy to be able to do this. And we would like to show this work in, you know, other places and have people, you know, really see these women.
So now, and can you give Laura a round of applause, please, for sharing? And we're moving along with the presentations because we're going to opening up to you soon. So now we're going to hear from Madame Christine Lewis.
So, yeah, as we look at these paintings, yeah, and how much, let me just say, we talk about the women who work as caregivers, elder caregivers, nannies and housekeepers, who are deemed the invisible workforce. We see those women go up on the Upper West Side, and we see those women go up on the Upper East Side, and then they disappear into some little enclave. But we don't question who this woman is. We see this woman who's got a life, who's got a face, who's got a name. And she's come here to make a better life for her children. And she's worked. There is no time span or beginning or end to her job, more so as she lives in. And how it's important to recognize this woman. And this woman are in those paintings. If we look around the room, and when we're done, have a time to go around the room and really look at these pictures in depth. So in 2000, there was conversation about who do we go to when women has been cussed out of their names, when women have been disrespected, when women have been abused. We talk about the Me Too movement. I deem it women who cry in silence, women who've been propositioned. And because it's an isolated workforce, it's one-on-one, two employer to one. There was nowhere to go. And so there was a convening of women across the board, women from the salons, you know, Southeast Asian women, women who were working in the homes. And there was a deep conversation about going for this Bill of Rights. And in the year 2000, Domestic Workers United was formed. And I got on board as somebody who worked, as somebody who's a fighter, as somebody who stands for someone who can't stand for themselves, because we must be each other's keeper. Yeah? We say, what would Jesus do? We really don't know sometimes what Jesus would do, but we must be each other's keeper. It mightn't have been me who was going through this ordeal where this man cussed me outside my name. But if my sister says, somebody in that house cussed her outside of her name, we should be convening and gathering, because it's our story, our forebear story, our mother's story. It's each one of us in the room. We can't be detached from these stories because it's women and reproductive labor. Yes? So the movement was born in the year 2000. And we went to Albany from the year 2003 to 2010. Going to Albany religiously, never giving up. Pastor, I love the story of the judge and the widow. Yeah. Oh, you did?
That's what they preached about.
Okay, I love that story. Because that woman in that time might have been a Jewish woman who was going for social services. She must have had a multitude of children. And she went to this judge religiously. And one day he said, "Oh, woman, you weary me." And he signed it into law. Hello. And I just feel that as women going to Albany with Jewish folks, with Christian folks, with folks from the Union, but religiously going to Albany, that Bill of Rights was set into law in 2010, which also set a precedent. I get goosebumps saying this because folks couldn't understand how Caribbean women, primarily Caribbean women, Southeast Asian women, African women, could come into another man's country, go to Albany, and make this, and agitate. Yeah. My father would say to me, "Child, they will send you back, you know." How you could go in another man's country and change his laws? That's what my father would say. He was nervous. Yeah, but we went in community. And could I say how essential community is today as it was then? Because we have somebody in office who's agitating against immigrants, right? So we need community. We come to these churches. What is the churches doing? How important community is to having a say and harboring women and immigrant women of color, women who are documented and undocumented, women who are trying to do honest, to send stuff back to their children, to educate their children. Because by and large, we're also students. Some of us did it to go to school. I was able to agitate, to do my MFA in creative writing. That's one of the reasons I write. And still work. And still agitate for workers. We're students going to Columbia right here, to the Union Theological Seminary, pushing strollers on the Upper West Side. Yes? So it's important. So we agitated and lobbied Albany for 6 years. And the Bill of Rights was passed into law in 2010. So you all could clap for that because it was a really big feat. This was also able to set a precedent for other states to go after their Bill of Rights and win. And in 2007 in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Social Forum, we were able to form the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So that too is big. So here we are still, thank you. Here we are still agitating, and we have the Me Too story as well, and that has come out. We're able to tell our stories. I know that we have an anchor group in DWU, and the work is ongoing. It's never stopped. Because there's always workers to liberate. Right now we're in conversation with NMAS, which is National Mobilization Against Sweatshops, for women who work 24 hours and get paid for 12. These are women who are working with, so we're all in the room, some of us are elders, some of us need care. We need to think about this woman who comes in, who has left her bed to come in to sleep with this elder patient, who, by the way, doesn't sleep either, because whatever issue she has, this lady has to stay focused. So we're in this conversation around women who get paid for 24 hours, who work 24 hours and get paid for 12. So we're taking this back to Albany. So the work is ongoing, yes? So I implore you all, everybody in the room, to continue to stand with women, women's work, women's story. It's essential. And they say there's a picture. If a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? Each woman in those pictures who are women with twines. And if you notice closely, there's always a sliver of a face that's looking through the paintings. Or saying, "Mommy, when you're coming home. When you're going to come home? Mommy doesn't have paper. She can't even travel. Or if she travels there, there's no guarantee that she'll come back. We have to keep on standing and working. Let me just say this. Caregiving is no easy work. It's really no, you're taking care of your family where you come from. You're taking care of this immediate family that you're charged to take care of. And you have to stay vigilant. I remember parents said to me, you don't say no to a kid. You don't say no. They don't say no. They redirect. And I said to the father, what is the alternative to no? And so in my pocket purse, there's a parent book of wit that I walk around with to show parents. And one of the wit in those books said, no matters to a child. No matters to a child. Because if the parent redirecting and the caregiver is not saying no and an incident happened, would we say to the parent, when this incident happened, I was redirecting? Thank you.
Please give Christine Lewis a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think it's a good segue now for us to hear from Laura's older sister and collaborator on this project, Dr. Sonia James-Wilson, because, you know, we have to put this in context. It's one thing for Laura to make these beautiful paintings that touch our hearts and our souls, and many of you who are sitting here can relate to these paintings. Dr. Wilson was just reading an article, I don't know if you saw, of this Jewish young man who is very famous, and he wrote an ode to his Jamaican nanny who helped him to understand the world through her eyes. And he has become an advocate for the work around domestic workers and what is going on here. And so I think it's just a good segue for us to get into the work that Dr. James-Wilson has been doing and continues to do. And I just ask you to give her a round of applause as she speaks about her work this afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Christina is such a hard act to follow. I'll try to be charming. I got interested in this project because after watching Laura for her whole life and looking at various series that she developed, this one was very, very compelling to me. And it's probably because it's partially my story as well, since we share the same mother. So that's really the way that I got interested in trying to collaborate with Laura on this work. I wanted to be able to talk about the work theoretically and to be able to contextualize it within a conceptual frame. And so postcolonialism is the frame that I chose. When Laura met Christine, it created this opportunity to not only talk about the work theoretically, but to talk about the kind of reading that people represented in the work would give to the work. And so the abstract has a little bit of that theoretical piece. Postcolonialism does not mean after colonialism. There's so many things around colonial thought that still exists. But it is one way to kind of read the paintings. As was mentioned before, this work was presented in 2012 at an international sociological conference in Buenos Aires. And I presented it when I was working at the University of Rochester as a professor. So I've since left that job to work on my own. I'm an independent scholar and an independent consultant, and very recently founded ArtID International. So ArtID International is a nonprofit organization that is really interested in helping people develop positive cultural and ethnic identities through the arts. And it is not work just for racialized people, it's work for all people, because all people have a cultural, racial, and ethnic identity. And so in addition to working with art centers and schools and community groups in the United States, I also work with folks in Mexico, Kenya. Do you want to go to the next slide? Mexico, Kenya, Canada, and Antigua. And so the work in Antigua is the way that I'm going to try to connect my interest in in this particular series of paintings. You can go to the next slide. In Antigua, I work with a high school called Clare Hall High School, and in this particular visit, I was working with an English class. And as I said, the work that I do integrates the art. So these students were studying Shakespeare's Tempest, and we were looking at how to impose Shakespeare's 5-act form into their own personal story. This is students role-playing an experience where a grandmother is scolding her grandchild for playing with a game that he shouldn't have played with. You can go to the next slide. And this one was about another scolding. These girls talked about how when they were in elementary school, a child was having a birthday, and the birthday cake was presented, and one of them grabbed a piece of the birthday cake before they got to sing, and so they were scolded by their teachers. And the scolding was to stand against the wall, to kneel against the wall back to back. And so this is students enacting that. I think that the fact that most of the students chose to retell stories of being disciplined in ways that to me appear colonial is interesting and something that I want to continue to explore. But the segue to this work is running into one of those students in a local supermarket. This student recognized me from working with him in class, and when I saw him, he told me that he was about to graduate. I was very excited, and I asked him what school he was going to go to after graduation, and he gave me this incredulous look, and he said, "I'm going to work," almost as if the idea that he would be going to school was completely outrageous. In light of this work and this notion of not having job opportunities where you work or needing to leave your country to make a better life, I started to ask questions to try to really understand this situation better. And so I came upon a group called the New Grassroots. They define themselves as young people committed to racial self-improvement as a pathway to community and nation building, and asked them about the kind of opportunities that exist now, mainly for young girls and women, just to get a sense of what had changed in the time between when my mother was on the island and now. And so the young people explained to me that for the average person in Antigua, the economic conditions are very difficult. That should not surprise anyone in this room. The way in which post-colonialism has really strangled the island is that even though they are an island surrounded with soil and water and fish, they don't farm. And the primary reason in the minds of the young people is because there's a stigma around farming. Farming is considered to be slave work, and so people don't farm. If you are not producing your own food, that means you have to import it. And when you import food, you have to pay for that. So the thing that's interesting in the case of Antigua is that when the containers come in with food, they leave empty. And so folks on the island are actually paying for that transportation twice. So food is very expensive. In terms of choices after graduation, there is a 2-year technical college, there's a 2-year state college, and the University of the West Indies has just opened a campus in Antigua. And it's just getting started, but it now has a 4-year university. According to the young people, the problem is access, which is true for young people everywhere. So most cannot afford tuition, books, or transportation to any of those institutions of higher learning. So if students are not going to school, like the young man that I met in the supermarket, what are they doing? Some of their options are to just go to work, which is what this young man was doing. Apparently, the minimum wage in Antigua is $3 an hour, or the equivalent of $3 US an hour, and it's been that way for the past 6 years. Most low-wage workers work in grocery stores, as the young man that I met, or in retail, or in hotel, in the tourist industry. Sometimes they do unpaid internships, which is as problematic there as it is here. So students are enticed with an internship, but essentially end up doing the work in offices that nobody else wants to do. And then after the internship, they are almost never hired. So it's just free labor, which also has some interesting post-colonial connections to it. And folks are still leaving the island. But what was really fascinating to me in speaking to these young people is that whereas in my mother's generation, it was very reasonable and likely that a young woman would have children and leave them in the island, young women now are having children off island. So they're waiting to have children in other countries, or they're going to other countries and marrying people there, or having relationships with men there and having children in other countries. So I thought that was very interesting. And it might be that, technological advances in travel have made that easier. When my parents left Antigua, they took a boat, first to London, then to Canada, then to New York. The other thing that they made very clear is that nobody leaves the island unless they have connections. So unless you're going to the UK, you need a visa, which is another way, which is just another obstacle for young people. They talked about getting student visas and then sometimes applying for work visas as a way to make a better life for yourself somewhere else. They talked about getting visitors visas and then not leaving, which sometimes happens. And there were a couple of cases of young people who did go to school overseas and come back to the island wanting to be able to invest and make a life for themselves on the island, but not being able to find jobs because of the economy. People rarely leave their jobs, and so most people of retirement age can't afford to retire, and so they stay, creating a lack of jobs. I see you shaking your head, and I was shaking my head too when I heard all of this. So I think the challenge for us in the so-called global north is exactly what Christine said. This particular group, because they're young, does all of their advocacy online. So they have podcasts and videos, and they post news articles. And the idea really is to advocate, to agitate, and to get the word out, because so many of us are completely in the dark about what is happening in other countries and how, even though some things have improved, there are a lot of things that haven't. Thank you.
Okay, now we've heard from, and thank you for that, we've heard from all of our presenters, and so I am going to open up the floor for Q&A in a moment, but I just wanted to ask a question of everyone sitting here, including you, Rep. Because you've heard so much this afternoon, and many of it we can relate to. And for those of you who heard the sermon this morning, do you see how God is just in it? Right? Don't you see that? Even to the cake. How many of you caught that? Right? And so I know, and I say to people, people say, do you believe in God? No, I know God. And I know God is real. And that's a whole nother statement. Because when I heard that, I just had to chuckle. Because it's as if it was taken from the sermon. And that the sermon this morning was called Holy Tantrums, and told that story. It just tied right in to this presentation today. It's prophetic, absolutely prophetic. And we hear about these wise women or mothers, these nannies, and they were wise. And how many of them became counselors to the women and some of the men they worked for, providing them with advice that they couldn't get otherwise. And so you think about the roles that they played in their lives. And so I'll say now and I'll ask this question of you all, if mom hadn't been a domestic worker, what would mom have been? And I'm going to start with Christine and just move it around.
A very thought-provoking question. Can we start with the past and then come back to me?
My mother was not a domestic worker, but my grandmother was. And she grew up in very poor central Georgia town called Gray, Georgia. And she married young, and good Lord, probably by the time she was 20, had about 9, 10 kids. And so if she was not a domestic worker, you know, to imagine what her life would have been had she had more access to opportunity, right? It's hard to imagine what her life would have been if she was not a domestic worker, but I would raise the question, what would her life have been had she had more opportunities as a young woman, right? When she married at 14 and began having babies, right? Because that was, you know, and her mother was just not too far removed from slavery, right? And so, as a pastor and as a theologian, I believe in like raising questions that are not necessarily easy to answer, that aren't easy to reconcile, and that we actually should sit with the tension of. And I think that is a question that resonates with all of the narratives of the women that we're talking about and all the work that we represent. And what would life be for these women if they had more access to opportunity? Yep.
Thank you. You want it, Christine?
You ready?
You ready?
No, I'll answer. Well, it begs the question of immigration, mass migration, and migration. You know, doctor was talking about migration and the kids having these opportunities. Yeah, and this has been happening time immemorial. I think since the 20s, women have been and men have been traveling to England by those steamliners that you talk about, and going to work and working as nurses in England or even the States. There was pockets, but women who are coming now. And the thing about it is that, what would they have been? America doesn't make that pathway easy to transition from what you used to be there. Whether you were that nurse there, or that policewoman, or that doctor, or just coming out of the university, yes. When you come here, even though if you're documented, your mother filed for you, you have to start at the bottom to go up. And these women have evolved. These women are counselors, as you're rightfully saying. Some women are working as social workers. Some women are, doctors by other means necessary. So yeah, it doesn't make it easy. But what do? We continue to persevere and stand. When all to do is stand.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. So, Doctor, you're the one. I had a few questions for y'all, but when you shared the story and put it in the context that you did about access and about opportunity, because this is what this is about, I was forced to raise up that question, and that's why I'm sharing that and asking you,
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that I hope I don't screw it up too much. I wouldn't describe my mother as a domestic worker. I think she did domestic work. Okay. And I think I loved earlier when Christine said that all work is sacred. That's what she did, but that wasn't what she was. So in terms of what would she be, when I think about what my mother was, I think of her as a maker. She was incredibly creative and resourceful and entrepreneurial, and passed all of that on to all of her children. And so, she made things with her hands, with her minds, with her words. And I think that's what she was. I think that in terms of limitations, those for her and her generation were more about patriarchy and gender. I think that, trying to pretend I'm not going to cry. For women in her generation who did not marry or who did not have children, their futures were very, very different. They were able to be independent. They were able to become educated, not suggesting that, getting married and having children is a bad thing. But there's a way in which at that point you couldn't do both. You had to do one or the other. And so, as a middle-aged person, visiting these 85-year-old women who did not have children and who did not get married, they make me think about what my mother could have done with that maker gene, with that identity of wanting to create and make things.
Thank you for that, and thanks for putting in context.
mother,
You have to say, so her answer is your answer? Should I take that? That's okay? I'll say that, and I thank you for doing that, because my follow-up was going to be just that a lot of our mothers did domestic work, but they really weren't domestic workers, and they never saw themselves as such. Because after working so many hours and doing all that they did, they still had the opportunity to cook, to bake, to sew, to make our clothing, right? To make sure that everything was as it should be. And though many of us felt abandoned, that our mothers were taking care of other people's babies, and we had to learn quick and fast in a hurry how to take care of ourselves, it taught us independence, you see. So there's a lot that we learned from these women who did domestic work, but were not domestic workers, and would be the first to say that to you, because they did not see themselves as such. Another thing is this issue of victimization and being victims. I have spoken to many women who do domestic work, and they will tell you, although they have been victimized, they're no one's victims, because they tend to be able to be very assertive even in face of being abused and dealing with so much more that comes from patriarchy and all of that. I find that when you find these women and you speak to them, and all you have to do is read the placards next to the paintings, and you'll hear the voice of these women. They are strong women. Don't for 1 minute believe these are weak women. And so at this point, I'd like to open up the floor, and I'll come to you with the microphone if you have a question, if you have something to share with us. And thank you all for really being such a good audience. I see you all shaking your heads, and that means you're enjoying what's being said. And right here, I'll just ask you to, if you don't mind, say your name or, you know, share a little something as you state or ask your question.
I have an interesting, my parents are from the South, and we happened to find out at my father's funeral what part of Africa we're from. And we also found out that we're also from Finland, when Finland brought a bunch of black women to strengthen the bloodline, and that's being explored now. But I'm wondering, I think, I used to read American Legacy. Does anybody remember that magazine? Well, they did a thing on Adam Clayton Powell. And Adam Clayton Powell and A. Philip Randolph and some other leaders around the 40s didn't like what was happening to soldiers after the war, because civil rights wasn't coming, voting rights wasn't coming. So they decided to have the West Indian come in and some East Indians to come in, because they would vote, because England treated them better. They would vote for civil rights. They would increase the numbers, the ratio of the black population, because we were like 1 out of 10. They would enforce some of the things that they had learned, because if I believe, the Bahamas and Trinidad have some of the highest reading rates in the Western Hemisphere. Yes, so that was part of it too. That if you don't have to know, you have to know what those leaders had decided on immigration 20 years before it happened.
All right, thank you for sharing. What's your name? Hi, Cassandra Williams. Thank you for that. Anybody else? I see a hand anywhere. Don't be shy, okay? Come around. And you can just scribble a note to yourself.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alexa Donovan. I'm a member here. I wanted to know if you'd ever seen the film. It was made in 2012. We screened it here. It's called The House I Live In. It's about the prison industrial complex, and what sparked this man, who is a white man, to do this film was his nanny, who raised him, had left her family on their own when she went to live with his family and raise him. And there's photographs and film footage at the beginning of him with this African-American nanny that he had. And while she was raising his family, her family had sort of fell apart, and her son ended up in prison. And he didn't know that Jarecki, his name is Eugene Jarecki. The film is called The House I Live In, and actually we screened it here at Riverside as part of Mission and Social Justice. So I do recommend it, and it's out there. You can see it. It's a very amazing film, but it started, the impetus was this nanny that he had who had a parallel life, and he didn't have any idea about her other family. She was his mother, really, and she had children who didn't have a mother. So I thought about that when you were speaking about these paintings. And I work in Union Square, and there's a marketplace there, and you see all the nannies all the time. All of these Caribbean women, Filipino women with these white children in their strollers. I see them almost every morning, and I wonder about these women. Who are these women? Where are they from? And their stories, and you look at their faces, and you see these babies who are pampered, and you see the women pushing the strollers. This is now. This is 2019, nearly 2020, and it's very much a part of our culture, and they're somewhat invisible. But I want to applaud your work, because this is actually bringing that to light, that this is continuing. It's an ongoing saga of these invisible women, and so I just want to applaud what you're doing. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Oh, okay, I got it. All right. I'm going to do Arlene, and then I come to you, then I come over there. Okay? Hey, baby.
Hi, my name is Arlene, and I'm the sister of Laura and Sonia James. And I just want to thank you both from the bottom of my heart, because our mom died last year, and I always wonder, like, how do people live forever, you know? And this is how they live forever, because you're honoring her. And I love you both, and thank you.
Thank you for that, Arlene.
Thank you. I guess I need to be updated. I work for Councilwoman Helen Diane Foster, and about 15 years ago, we put in a resolution with the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights and calling for recognition with the Labor Relations Board. I guess it was a few years ago that domestic workers could form a union and be under the labor relations. And I think the farm workers in New York State, that law just passed this year. So I just wonder where we are with unionization, the living $15 living wage, and what other rights of that original Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights that we're still fighting for now. Oh, I'm Jim. Thank you.
I'll bring the mic to you, Chris.
Right,
Oh, you have one?
yeah, thank
okay, great.
you.
Thank you.
You know, I like to say in the Trini lingo, the journey has just begun. Yeah. We got three things on that Bill of Rights. One was overtime paid 1.5 hour hourly wage after 40 hours of work in a week, and after 44 hours for live out, there must be overtime, right? For those folks who work 44 hours and beyond, there must be overtime. 1 day of rest per week of overtime pay if a worker agrees to work on her day off of rest. And 3 paid days off per year after 1 year of working with the same employer. And protection against workplace discrimination and based on gender and et cetera, et cetera. I believe the national right now is looking at an overall Bill of Rights to protect domestic workers. I don't know what that looks like right now. I know $15 is being talked about now. I don't know if it's passed into law yet. I know in New York State, I'm not sure if it's passed or if it's still a conversation that's brewing. But I know, let me just say this, that even in the industry, it's a conscionable thing. Women are working without protection, without rights to see their doctors, or even a healthcare bill. So some employers do what is right. I applaud those employers who just know that they go to Wall Street or wherever they work, and they get everything that they're supposed to get, and they come home and give it. This doesn't paint everything in black and white. The journey continues. We're still fighting for what that would look like, yes? So it's a lot of work to be done. While it's been progressing, it has to get even much more stronger. And that takes all of us going to Albany agitating, mobilizing, organizing. And that's why we continue to do. We talk, Ella Baker said literacy and liberation goes hand in hand. We still convene and meet with women every third Saturday in the month to do, and also partner with the Department of Consumer Affairs to know what their rights are, paid personal days, paid sick leave, because women work the jobs, they go home. Then, as a matter of fact, some of these women are taking care of patients and they go home and die. And it's critical. And as you say, we see these women in Union Square. Those are faceless women who have their story. You talk about the woman who we talk about the industrial complex. You look at, our office is in Crown Heights. And there's a massive group that Fathers and Sons Against Violence in Crown Heights. And you look at those women who go to work. They have to be at work by 7:30 and be back by 7:30, which means that they're traveling. Fractured into that is so much earlier, I know. That's why these stories, our stories, are important and community. And these stories have to be told. So those women who are going to work, sons are being shut down in the corner of Franklin Avenue, East Troop, Kingston. And you're right, it's a deep conversation. What would it look like if women should go to work from 9 to 5? And after that, if they choose to do overtime and come home and take care of their family. But they're taking care of this family around the clock. So what we've done in our work is also partner. We talk about literacy and liberation. We've partnered with the Public Theater to do theater, as Joe Papp envisioned theater to be, which is all-inclusive, diverse, bringing community groups from the 5 boroughs to do Shakespeare in the Park. As you talk about Shakespeare, we do Shakespeare in the Park, bring community groups. Writing, literacy, with the Pen American World Voices, bringing on women to tell their stories. And what we have done in the last 5 years is tell the stories to each other to be deposited in the Library of Congress. So we did that in 2014. So there are stories there. And we're still having, formulating a podcast around frequently asked questions. If women want to know what's going on in the industry, we have these open lines where women could call in and talk and find out what's going on. So yes, there's still work to be done on the grassroots level and on the national level.
Thank you.
And it's beginning to be looked at.
Thank you so much, Christine Lewis. Thank you.
Huh?
You were in the Shakespeare production?
Yes. I've been, yeah.
I knew I saw you.
Familiar face.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We have one
yes, I was
question.
in Hercules.
This just this year?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We have one, a final question statement. Just say who you are, please.
Okay, my name is Martin. I'm a member of this church. Could you address the children whose parents left them to come here, our Great Britain? The children reunited with their parents, and they have so much resentment to that mother or that father for leaving them. Could you address that, please?
Well, it's
And
funny.
also, the generation that you talk about going to England, they're Windrush generation.
The what?
Windrush
Yeah.
generation
Yeah, my
that went
answer
to
is
England.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's
Okay.
interesting. When Laura had done these paintings, I think I was doing some talk with WBAI, and I had asked Laura what was her incentive behind these paintings. Remember? Some years ago. But yeah, that's a very important question. And I feel pained around it. I always said to my mother, wherever I go in the world, my daughter would go with me. And it was true. Because when I had my daughter, the nurse asked me, who's going to care for my daughter? Who's going to help me care for my daughter? And I said, my mother. And she said, it's always all your mother. Why it's always your mother? Why it can't be you? And that was an epiphany for me. And it's funny, I remember my sister had come to visit, and she wanted to stay, and I said to her, go back to your children. Go back home to your 2 children, your girl children, your boy children, they need you. And I've spoken to women across the board who has brought up their children, and there has been such a divide. The kids are so resentful. I remember case in point, a woman said to me her daughter is in the hospital, And her daughter didn't want the mother to know that she's in the hospital. Because also, this mother came up and has already created a family. So there's a lot of resentment. And it's a profound question that that is being had. Because we talk about crime across the board. And those kids that are left behind are deemed the barrel children, right? And we talk about poverty. Because what it is that this parent who works here, who works really hard, really tired, and she's packing this barrel with the best of stuff to send to the children home. And then the neighbor looks across the window and see this fine Nike pair of shoe or this fine coat that the mother trying to appease her child, guilt. And then there's a surge in crime because people don't have. And when people don't have, they become needy, right? So it's an interesting question. I don't have the answer. Perhaps the doctor might be able to address it. I don't know what the answer to that is 100%, but I know in our quarters there are talks around how resentful, and it's understandable too. My mother have left me there and can't come home. It breeds, yeah?
It absolutely does, and it is one of those questions, like Reverend Gordon says, that sits with you, and it's okay that we can't answer those questions because... And that's, well, Laura just remembered, that is Patsy's story. So can I take a moment to just plug that? Because I think I keep hearing it and everything. So I just narrated a book that is fast becoming the tome, I should say, of the immigrant domestic worker. It's a book called Patsy by Nicole Dennis Ben. And you could write this down. And this book, Patsy, is a book I narrated. So it's in audio form as well. Thank you. Laura said I did a great job. From Laura, that means good. That's good. Thank you. Well, Arlene is clapping, so that's even better. But, but what the story is about is everything we're discussing here. And it is a book for a time like this. It's been on the New York Times bestseller for some time. Oprah has been, everybody is after Nicole Dennis Ben for this book, NPR, you name it, because she is discussing every single aspect that we've spoken about here. The resentment, the abandoning, a mother who abandons her child for 10 years, and the resentment, finding identity, coming of age. Were you really prepared to be a mother? Or did you just have a child? You came here not intending to be doing domestic work, but this is the only work you can find because you have no papers, you see. The notion of not having papers and having a safe house. My house was a safe house. Your house was. Those homes were like the stops on the Underground Railroad because these were illegal folks, quote unquote, who needed a place to come to on the weekend when they got time off because they worked in wherever they were working in. So the story is layered, and Nicole Dennis Ben does a fantastic job of presenting this tale in the book Patsy. And I think that, Laura, as I'm standing here, there needs to be Christine, Laura, Dr. James-Wilson, some collaboration with Nicole, the book, and this, because it is, for a time like this, it's the same story, and how we honor these women, and like Arlene says, how do we immortalize, is that the word? Immortalize, thank you, them. This is how we do it, by telling their story. And so I'd like to thank you all. I'm gonna turn the mic now over to our Reverend to close us out. And I just want to thank you all for this time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I want to give a special thanks to Carrie Carqueso. Yes, for, yes. And all of our tech people, come. Who is the coordinator for worship here at Riverside Church, who is responsible for curating all of the art that happens in this space in conjunction with our, worship and art staff. Coffee isn't kicked in yet. And so I just want to say thank you, a public thank you to her and our tech team and all the people who do the AV and sound and stuff. To be here on a Sunday after church is always such a gift. And so thank you so much. Please give her a round of applause. So we are grateful for you. We invite you to stay around and have conversation, continue to look at the art, continue to share about this exhibit. It's here until November 15th. So share about it on Facebook. Please follow Laura on Instagram. She has a lovely Instagram page. And so thank you so much. And I'm just going to end with prayer. Is that all right? Yes. God, we are so grateful for you and our ability to share our stories. God, you are a storyteller. You have formed this faith through the stories of those who have come before us, and we are still making stories today, God. And so we thank you that the work that we are committed to, that these conversations that we are having are still shaping the stories for the future. They are laying the pathway for both men, women, children, families to better understand the narratives from which we have come. And God, we are grateful for allowing us to be the hands and the feet of Christ to change the laws, to change the practices, to change the policies, to make it possible for the women whose stories we have been talking about today to live full, complete, whole lives. We are so grateful for you. We thank you for this day. We thank you for this time together, and we ask that you bless us as we leave this place, but never from your presence. And we ask these things in your Son, Jesus' name, and everyone says, amen. Amen.